Today we're excited. We're bringing together three voices. Bob Moore, whose perspective is grounded in decades of real-world industry leadership. Matt Cody, founder of the Oil and Gas Workers Association, who has been a strong advocate for the workforce that powers this entire ecosystem. And Dewayne Stewart, the originator of the ideas and presentation that sparked what we're now calling the Gulf of America Renaissance. In this conversation, we're going to unpack where these ideas came from, the challenges of turning them into reality, and what it will actually take to move them from concept to impact. Let's get into it. Well, thanks so much. We are here with some very cool individuals. We're joined by Dewayne Stewart, Mr. Bob Moore, and Mr. Matt Cody. Thank y'all for being here this morning. We have an interesting subject to talk about. I'll start with introductions. Bob, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Hey, yeah, good morning, guys. Pretty excited to be a part of this conversation. I'm 50 years in the oil and gas business. Came to South Louisiana in 1976, went to work for Shell Oil Company. And certainly through that timeline, been part of all the ups and downs and trials and tribulations. And each time we adjust accordingly and we be creative, innovative, and try to figure out how we move forward. So 50 years later, here we are today, still trying to figure out our destiny and our future, and looking forward to today's conversation because I think it helps, move the needle in a different direction for especially the Gulf Coast region.
Thank you, Bob.
Thanks, Doug.
Now, Matt Cody, tell us about yourself.
My name is Matt Cody. I'm an oilfield truck driver, started a grassroots organization. I grew up in this industry, mostly in West Texas, the Permian Basin. My dad's worked in the industry all his life. I'm a third generation. Both of my grandfathers and my great-grandfather worked in this industry. So I love our oil and gas industry, and what we do at OGWA is just a whole lot of education, and then a little bit of policy work, and just try to advance the American oil and gas industry.
Very cool. And last but not least is Mr. Dewayne Stewart. Mr. Dewayne, we met him a few months ago, and he did a presentation at a AAD meeting that caused a bunch of engineers' heads to explode and caused a lot of conversation. Dewayne, welcome this morning.
Thanks, Doug. Appreciate the invitation. Looking forward to visiting with you and Matt and Bob over the next several minutes to hour. Long story short about me, I grew up in central Louisiana. I've been 35 years in the oil patch, broke out with Exxon in New Orleans, and through a series of transfers and relocations, I've ended up here in Houston. I've worked for international companies like Exxon. I've worked for large independents. I've worked for small startup companies. And I've basically, if it's an engineering role, I've pretty much been in it. If it's a geoscience role, I've pretty much been in it. And so I've had a fairly eclectic 35-year career. And I think it's allowed me to have some interesting insights on where this conversation may be headed today.
Well, Dewayne, thank you. Tell us a little bit about Foundation Energy Partners and what you guys do.
Yeah, so Foundation Energy Advisors, or FEA, we're essentially, I don't like to use the word engineer shop, even though we do provide engineering and geoscience help to companies, but I like to kind of focus heavy on the advisory role. Anybody can turn the crank and generate a calculated number. What we try to do is give people insight to what the data and the underlying principles are showing. So I do a lot of work with mergers and acquisitions, M&A. I've helped companies with hedging strategies. I've helped companies with asset development depletion plans, and that inevitably leads into litigation. And I've got litigation. I was going to say 3 months ago in January, I had litigation spanning or stretching from Texas to North Dakota, but I can say that we have successfully resolved the Texas case. So now it's just North Dakota.
Well, very good. it sounds like because of your experience and knowledge and the things you've been involved with and the way your career has took you on a bunch of different paths, you're kind of uniquely one step away, but very deep involved into the oil and gas industry. And so as we bring ourselves to discuss this presentation that you made, how did you find yourself to be thinking about this in a different way? It seems like everybody was going left and you were coming right. Let's tell us a little bit about the thought process of how you got there.
Yeah, so actually to give credit where credit's due, Bob and I were having this conversation August, September of last year, maybe. Correct me if I'm wrong, Bob. But we were just talking about South Louisiana and how we remember the activity levels of the 90s. Even though we've been through boom and bust cycle, we've all lost count of the number of times we've gone through boom and bust. But the activity of the 70s, 80s, 90s in South Louisiana, is tremendously greater than it is today. And so we were talking, and he asked me, he said, Dewayne, do you ever think there'll be a renaissance of drilling activity in South Louisiana, GOM shelf, essentially near shore and inland waterways? And I said, well, that's a great question, Bob. Why don't I, do a quick 50,000 foot deep dive into could the Gulf of America have a renaissance?
And that's how it was born.
That's how it was born.
We started doing these about a year ago, and some of the conversations we had in this studio at this office prompted those type of conversations about leadership and mentorship. But it just goes to show you that AI can't do everything. It takes conversations and human interaction, and I think that's a beautiful way to start it. So, Dewayne, if you want to start with your presentation, you can talk about whatever slides you want to talk about. You can talk about, I'm really interested in some of the feedback you may have gotten post-presentation. Like, tell me about those conversations since then.
Yeah, so essentially post-presentation, we've had a lot of people go out to the website, watch the video. I've had people request for government figures to clip the 30-minute talk down to about 15 minutes because some of our politicians in Washington, D.C. have about 10 to 15 minutes that they can spare. And so we've actually done that editing of that original 30-minute talk to provide certain key political leaders. The interesting thing has been, what do we do? How do we move this ball up the field, right? To take a football analogy versus going side to side, left to right, right? How do we go north south? And Matt and I were chatting yesterday about what it's going to take to move this ball up the field. And I think that's directionally where I think the conversation is essentially going to be headed here over the next several weeks to months.
That's very good. And I skipped right across a part that might be important to some people that did not see your presentation. But if you would give us the elevator speech of what your presentation is about, I think that would be important to folks that haven't seen it yet, although it's been widely spread. I'm sure that this presentation is going to come to somebody that hadn't seen it. So tell us what it's about.
Yeah, essentially the presentation covers three key topics. The first is the current state of the oil and gas industry in the Gulf of America. So we want to start with a baseline of where are we at. And so before we figure out where we're at, it helps to see where we've been, right? And so that's the first part of the presentation. Then once we realize where we're at, we pivot to looking at factors contributing to why the shelf lost its luster. Because that's essentially the best way to couch it is the majors have moved out. We've seen consolidation and essentially substantial decline on the shelf over the last 20 years. And then we finish and we wrap it all up by talking about some key elements that I believe will help birth the shelf renaissance. And so that's essentially the presentation in a nutshell.
Very good. Bob, any comments from you at this point?
Yeah. So as we, again, reflect on where we've been and where we're at and where do we need to go, a couple other key elements here is just over time we've seen our business change a lot, right? Of course, live in Morgan City, and years ago, a major iconic recognizing factor was McDermott Corporation that everyone in our business and industry understands. We're very active in building structures for placement offshore, especially on the shelf. And 15 years ago, they shut it down in their Amelia yard and moved to Mexico. I don't think we really understood how profound that was. That was an indicator at that point that our business was changing. And of course, the deep water was very active, and that was the focus going forward. However, we all know, it's that separates the men from the boys. So our playing field has shrunk significantly over the years, especially on the independent, smaller operators. The major players, of course, are pretty resilient to both, geopolitical or geographical regions and can adjust accordingly. In most part, they can still execute on 5 to 7 year plans, irregardless of what the political conditions or commodity prices are doing. But for the rest of the base of what supports our oil and gas industry, it's been a significant impact to, reducing the number of service players, number of operators, but more importantly, really hitting communities economically, especially as we know the Gulf Coast region here on the Texas and Louisiana coast. And, so when we step back and try to understand where do we go from here, it's looking at these opportunities in which Dewayne has outlined. And one thing I recall, Charlie Goodson at PetroQuest, he presents to the federal board of on the commodity front, what's the global and local reserve base. And the one thing I remembered him saying profoundly was that in most all the areas we're drilling and producing oil and gas, we're only extracting about 30 to 40% of the reservoirs. To me, a flag went off, okay, that maybe, that requires some deep dive in technology. And we have done some of that with fracking and some of the other opportunities that have ongoing. But how do we make it more prolific and to really kind of bring back some of these coastal areas? And of course, when I met Dewayne and we started talking about these opportunities, he brought a lot of substance to the table of, some options and ideas that we should consider. And the best thing, I guess a positive to negative, even though we've had a significant reduction, the technology now has proven out to be a benefit to our advantage that we can start talking about these opportunities again. And so I'm really excited that, we're talking today about it. Certainly there's still lots of challenges. I have no misconception that we're going to return to the days of the 80s because we are, as an industry, become more efficient, right? I mean, that's what we do. And even when we look at what goes on in the shale plays, they've become more efficient. And a lot of that has to be contributed to some of the advising that Dewayne has offered up in some of these areas where, drill less wells, be more efficient in when you drill a well. So it's just part of who we are as an industry. But the reality is when we look at today, we went from 8,077 structure types on the Gulf of America. We're down to 1,100 structure types, including deep water, and 250 of those structures are yet to be decommissioned. That's a wake-up call, no question. And we've been through these conversations with our state representatives to understand why the economic impact has been so significant. And then ironically, right now, our two major economic impact plays are decommissioning, which we probably will benefit from that probably the next 3 to 5 years. But what's after that? We know the deep water play will continue on, but when you look at the deep water players right now, especially in the Gulf of America, we have roughly 39 deep water players, and so that's and they stay pretty disciplined to their programs, not just here on the Gulf of America, but also internationally as well. So we've got to look at, what can we do to continue to enhance and be a major player in the oil and gas sector. And another opportunity that's presented itself is with the LNG build out in that market play. Certainly, how do we develop these gas fields again and create kind of another opportunity for the local content of the Gulf region?
Yeah, excellent points, Bob. Dewayne, since your presentation, several things have happened globally that make this even more important. Obviously, the Venezuela situation, the war in Iran is, choking things up over there, and things can't move back and forth. So how do those economics impact the sense of urgency to move this forward in the Gulf?
Yeah, I mean, this is not, I'm plagiarizing. I'm trying to remember who I plagiarized this from. But it's been said that energy security is national security. And so when you look at nations who have made hard pivots to the left, and basically they've shut down hydrocarbon resources, whether it be coal, oil, or natural gas, and they've decided to build their grids on intermittent, unreliable technologies, they are much more susceptible to these types of shocks than, say, the United States is right now, where we are exporting all-time record highs of crude oil and petroleum products, as well as natural gas in the form of LNG. But people don't realize this. We also move a lot of natural gas south across the border in Texas into Mexico. So we've got pipelines headed south as well, in addition to the LNG cargoes that are going out via ship.
Very good. One of the things that was really stark about your presentation was the fact that it potentially drops drilling days almost 50%. Is that an incentive that'll incentivize both venture capital people and capital and operators to make this a little more attractive to them, even at a lower commodity price?
Yeah, that 50-day drop, that was what we've seen in the Western Haynesville, or as people are dubbing it, the Waynesville. Those are unbelievable results, where you're 100 plus days starting out drilling to 20,000 feet deep, in some cases TVD, and then going 5,000 or 10,000 feet horizontal to get to 25 or 30,000 foot measured depth. To go from 100 plus days to sub 50, that's what we need. And look, I'm not saying we're going to be a 50-day well in South Louisiana, but the point is that if we look at McMoran, what they experienced 15 plus years ago, they took 180 days to drill deep in a well. Matt and I were looking at this yesterday. They went from 20,000 feet deep in an old well to 30,000 feet deep, 29,000 feet deep, and they took 180 days. They offset that well with an appraisal well from surface, and it took them roughly 360 days. So we as an industry, as a service provider, need to give operators much better ROP performance in South Louisiana and the Gulf of America shelf to encourage them, to incentivize them to make the investments. Because going 30,000 feet measured depth, 30,000 feet TVD on essentially a vertical well, no operator's going to sign up for a year's worth of drilling campaign. It's just not going to happen. It costs too much money. We've got to drive those costs in those days down to the 90-day or sub 90-day region for these deep wells on the shelf.
Very good. Let's switch over to you, my friend. Tell us a little bit more about your organization, what it does, and what part you want to play on this renaissance that we're working on.
Dewayne's presentation excites me, and I'm glad that Bob connected us. You know, a lot of the groupthink and even the mentality and which leads to the morale of the industry is that the shelf has been played out, that it's done, that our industry is dying. And we see that in people that even work in our industry. They go, well, I'm not sure how many days we have left. And so Dewayne's presentation just generates a whole lot more excitement for our industry. You know, Oil and Gas Workers Association, I told you I started 11 years ago because, number one, I wanted to put a face on the industry that was harder for the radical left and some of these extreme environmentalists to attack. Wanted to remind people in this country that whether we're Republicans or Democrats or independents, it's our jobs that some of these environmental groups are trying to push out of this country and give to foreign countries with far less environmentally conscious standards. You know, nobody cares about Darren Woods. They see him as just, oh man, he's just the CEO of ExxonMobil. Darren Woods works hard in this industry every day. Bob Moore still looks like he's 30. You know, he's been working in this industry since Titusville, probably.
He started when he was 4.
Yeah, I'd heard. Cable tool rig or something. He may have dragged it out to location himself. I'm not sure. The legend of Bob Moore grows every day. But Dewayne's presentation, what he's found, like I said, just generates a whole lot more excitement for this industry, especially in South Louisiana.
Well, the people I've shared it with are like, it's closer than we think. This is an achievable goal. I mean, there's some barriers to doing it tomorrow, but based on what technology moves so fast in all parts of our life today. So this presentation has some challenges built into it that are easily achievable with the great minds we have in this industry, because I consider this industry one of the greatest in the world in overcoming challenges, working hard, innovative, turn your hat backwards and just make it happen. This is what I see in the oil industry that I grew up in, that I work in, that has served me so well as a career. And other people don't see it like that. Part of what I do when I have time is I volunteer with an organization called LAGCO here, and we go into the schools and we teach kids about STEM and energy. And the comments and the conversations we have with those kids that are in junior high and upper elementary, it just hurts my heart because they have been taught so much negative stuff about the oil and gas industry and the energy industry in general that they think windmills should be everywhere. And I'm not against any form of energy, but they don't understand it takes energy to power that phone they have in their hand and that internet they have at their house and all these data stations that are being built all over the United States have these huge commitments to energy. Where's that going to come from? So this needs to happen.
Now, see, that's where I differ because I'm wholly against highly subsidized, unreliable forms of energy like wind and solar that are mostly imported from China and other foreign countries. They don't create any American jobs, and they're actually a net drain on the economy. They also don't generate severance tax revenue. So whenever we talk about our state budgets and we talk about how, well, where's the money and why are we having to cut expenses? Why can't we fund schools, roads, hospitals, first responders, social programs? It's because we've driven reliable, affordable oil and natural gas out of a lot of states. So I'm sorry, whenever I get on my soapbox, y'all just start reeling me in because I'm all about oil and gas. You know, but you hit on a great point. And there's a state representative from Gonzales named Kathy Edmonston, who is a second-term legislator. She served on the Bessie board. And whenever I started working over here in 2023 a lot and got to serve on Governor Landry's Transition Council, Kathy told me that in the schools here in Louisiana, they teach all those things that you're talking about. They teach that, man, we need to have this transition. We need to get to this 100% clean energy. And they are told that there's some climate crisis, that we're all about to die, which I believe, according to AOC's calculations, is January 21st of 2031. Please stop contributing to your 401k. You won't need it after that year. But that's the kind of climate alarmism we have. You know, you talk about the technological advances, and what Dewayne Stewart is talking about is revolutionizing the industry, truly a renaissance. That's why it's so exciting. I can't imagine what people said to George Mitchell whenever he started talking about hydraulic fracturing. But then, of course, late 2000s, early 2010s, when the Harold Hams of the world came along and really started to perfect that technology, that's what made America energy independent. And Dewayne Stewart is the leading edge of the next big technological advancement of our industry.
Very good. One of the things that came up as a group, we have a group of people that involves Telly Blanchard and Shanna Cornegie, Bob, and a few others. This gentleman here is fleshing this out a little further in the form of a forum that we create where we can put a panel up there to discuss the technical aspects, the challenges, the engineering aspects, the capital aspects, and just kind of continue to push this forward. So I guess our goal and the reason we're talking about it today is, first of all, it's a good idea. It needs to happen. And in order for it to happen, we got to do a better job of advocating for the industry and combating the misspeak and the crap that's been fed to our kids for years, or else we won't have any workers that'll do those jobs that need to happen in 5 to 10 years. Because I talk to a lot of kids and none of them want to work in the oil field. They all want to be a YouTube influencer or something like that. And there's only a few of those jobs to go around. But I think it's important that we teach them. One story I tell, there was a kid that was really good at playing video games and his parents was on him. All you're going to do is play video games. You're never going to amount to anything. He went to school, got a degree in computer science, and within a year after getting his degree, right now he's sitting in a boat in a big, comfortable chair with 2 joysticks, and he's operating an ROV subsea, connecting things on the seafloor, working in the energy industry, working half a year, making more money than he ever imagined. Well, that's an oil and gas job. But
That's right.
He majored in computers, so he didn't have to turn any wrenches. So there's a lot of jobs, everything from engineering to safety, like I did, and paramedicine that are supported, and you can see it all across this Gulf of corridor that we're still suffering from the shelf not being open for business. And thank God for the plug and abandon stuff, but that has a limited lifespan. Dewayne, at this point, we're going to kick it back over to you, so you have time to talk about whatever you want to talk about at this point.
Yeah. Am I allowed to share an image?
That's a great question. Try it. See what happens.
Let's go. Let me go share.
Once again, it's another thing we've never done.
Oh, window. There we go. Let's see if I can share this. Look at that.
It's there.
Awesome.
Perfect. So the question, I believe, some of the people asked, is this 5 to 15 year essentially termination point of the shelf? How real is that? Right. And so I spend a lot of my time doing forecasting. I mean, I've been forecasting probably 30 of my 35 years in this industry. And just like the stock market, where past performance is indicative of future results, right? In other words, in private equity, they look for teams that have performed well, because if you performed well, the chances of you performing well again are very high. I mean, that's the whole point of private equity. Well, when it comes to oil and gas, historical performance is a very strong indicator and very strongly correlated to future results. And when you have 20 years of trend data, you would be crazy to ignore it. And in this case, this is what the data is showing us. Now, if I add, this shows monthly production over the past 50, 60, 75 years, essentially since the birth of the Gulf of America, the Gulf of Mexico in the late 40s, early 50s. What's not shown on here is what's integrated, the area underneath the curve. But the lime green shelf has produced 13.8 billion barrels of oil. The dark green deep water, take a guess. How many barrels do you think would be integrated in the dark green area? 12 billion. So the deep water in a much shorter time period has almost equaled what we have discovered on the shelf as far as oil is concerned. The gas, the shelf has produced just over 170 trillion cubic feet of gas underneath that wedge. The deep water, only about 24 trillion cubic feet. So we see that the deep water, the majors have preferentially or overweighted to crude oil because that's what the price signals they're getting from the market, right? The crude oil has been more valuable. That's what they focused on. There are large gas deposits in the deep water. No one wants to go pursue them because economics aren't there in the sub $3 gas price that we're seeing today. And so the question is can we reverse this natural gas decline on the Gulf of America shelf? That curve is currently making about 300 million cubic feet a day. I was vetting an exploration prospect in the last couple weeks. Now, the prospect shop believes it's a TCF. I think it's probably closer to a quarter of a TCF if it hits. But the point here making is that one prospect has the ability of delivering 100 to 200 million cubic feet a day. It's on the shelf at 12,000 feet deep. In other words, that one prospect could nearly double the shelf natural gas production by itself. So if people think that the shelf is done, it's over with, it's dead, they're wrong. The prospects are there. We need to basically incentivize the industry to come back and get it. And we do that through better, faster, cheaper drilling.
It makes sense. Great slide presentation, great explanation. As a non-engineer, I understand that completely. Thank you.
Welcome.
Thanks for sharing. Thanks for doing our first screen share on a 4-person podcast. Pretty excited about that.
See, I told you, Dewayne Stewart, Bob Moore, all of you involved in this project, y'all are the leading edge of the new renaissance.
I'm more of a dull butter knife, but the leading edge is on the other side of this call. It's Bob and Dewayne. Thank you, guys.
Well, and to that point, I think the best opportunity we have is certainly the network of people and experience that we all have become a part of over our years in our career. And while certain parts of our business is what we call at the end of life cycle, we need to create a new life cycle. And that's my mission. And I know that's most of it in this room here. That's our mission, to create an opportunity for the next generation and continue our legacy in our business. I sometimes wish I would have been part of this business early in the truly pioneering days. I got to know Red Adair briefly. And when you think about how not long ago that they were still working on very, very primitive conventional technology. Maybe not technology, but just for well control, and look at where we're at today. You would not even consider any of the types of scenarios he performed during those days. I mean, it would just be unheard of. But so when you look at where we've come and how far we've come, and Matt and I talked the other day, our still biggest challenge is how do we get the new generation, the young generation, to understand this business. To me, it's still adventurous, still exciting. The best thing, it's global. You can go anywhere you want to in the world to do this business, right? And more importantly, for people to understand, this is not the days of the rope and spinning chain on the rig floor, okay? It's way more sophisticated than that. And, but it's how do we communicate that? How do we convey that? And again, what we said, just the ground support services for our business is way beyond the rig floor, from the legal side, from, just liability, insurance, accounting fundamentals. There are just so many other opportunities that lend itself to this business, and just the preconceived notion that you're going to be standing in coveralls covered with oil, and it sounds kind of simplistic in terms, but that's what people still equate our business into. And not, in certain areas of the country, that is still the case. But when you get into the offshore market and deep water market, I mean, we're doing things short of putting men on the moon, so, and that's what we need to figure out how to convey that message. And look, back in 1985, 86, the bumper sticker, last one out, turn the lights out. That's 41 years ago. And here we are today talking about how do we create a renaissance. So we are not dead by any stretch of the imagination. We've just got to create the new frontier. And people like Dewayne bring that insight to the table, and we need more of that. Or do we have challenges? Absolutely. But like Matt Damon said, when he was on Mars, that movie, to survive, and we're not to that extreme, but you solve one problem and you move to another problem. But you don't quit. You have to continue solving problems, and that's where we're at. We are capable of solving the problem and finding solutions.
Yeah, I agree. Dewayne, in closing, you got any other comments for us?
Yeah, Matt and I were visiting yesterday, and he said, why do you think the ultra deep shelf stubbed its toe 15 years ago? And it was a really good question. And I think, to use an analogy, the thesis is correct. The zip code was wrong. In other words, we went straight to the 30,000 foot deep TVD formations. We didn't start in 10,000 feet of water depth in the deep water, right? We started at 3,000 feet. Then we went to 4,000. Then we went to 5,000. In other words, we slowly worked our way up to the great whites of the world that are in 10,000 feet of water depth. We did not do that in ultra deep drilling. We went straight to 30,000 feet deep. What I recommended to Matt is that keep the thesis, but let's go find these reservoirs at 22, 23, 24,000 feet deep so that we start working our way down dip. And if we do that, I think we will have much, much greater success, commercial and mechanical.
Yeah, that's a great way to mitigate some of the challenges that are presented in this and in the technical aspects. Great point. Matt?
Gosh, just exciting stuff. Really enjoy Dewayne taking time with me yesterday to explain a lot of this. Like I said, just very exciting. I don't know, this for this to happen has to be a convergence. States need to understand, and especially when we're talking about the state of Louisiana specifically, with most of this, the state needs to understand that this is doable. It's possible. And I think the business model, the whole thesis here, is correct for any industry. Let's do it faster, cheaper, and get a return for our investment, sooner. And so it's the same business model for everything. And I think that Dewayne, Bob, you, all the group working on this have the incredible opportunity to show that it can be done for the oil and gas industry in South Louisiana.
Yeah, I agree. I think the oil and gas industry has the smartest, hardest working, most technically capable employees and tertiary employees of any industry. And I think there's no reason this can't become a reality. But our job is to keep the conversation going and keep the questions out there, provide the forum, and we're going to do that. So we thank you guys for coming together and giving us an hour of your time this morning. And we look forward to many more of these as we go forward.
Thank you, Doug.
Yeah, thanks, Doug. Again, appreciate this opportunity and this venue to help us continue the discussion. It's an important one. We need to get the messaging out. We need to, continue to network and bring people into this network. And I think as we progress along, we'll end up with a good outcome.
Thanks,
Great.
guys.
Thank y'all.
You have a great
There you go. Thanks, good. Thanks, Matt.
Hey, thank y'all. I'm learning a lot. I really am excited.